Hi and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the amazing and the amazingly heavy 80 to 200 f2.8 Nikon zoom. Let's get into it. Right, firstly, this huge brute of a lens and I have history, and I should explain a little bit of that before I go on to talk about the lens. As a theatre photographer, quite a few years ago now, I needed a long zoom lens and I needed a fast zoom lens, and I was a Nikon user, so all I could really go for was the 80 to 200 2.8, and at that time it was the oldest version, which wasn't AF, had a one-touch zoom, which I have to say wasn't of the best because they used to wear, and if you tilted the camera down they would zoom forward. But it was quite simply the best longer lens I ever used. And when I gave up theatre photography, I used the 80 to 200 for a while, shooting equestrian events, and it was superb for that as well. However, when I stopped that and went into photo education, I couldn't really justify keeping my 80 to 200, and so I sold it on, and pretty much regretted it ever after. Fast forward, and I decided to renew my acquaintance with the 80 to 200 2.8, and this time the more modern version. Let me explain. The 80 to 200 2.8 has been around since, I believe, 1982. There was a prototype version in 1978, I think, but 1982 was when they actually started to be put into photographers' hands, and pretty much immediately it became the press photographer's lens of choice, round the neck, and carried under pretty much every circumstance, usually with a big flash on top, and this would be photographing politicians and celebrities, and it was the go-to press lens. I had a fairly well-worn copy of it in the day, and this is also a fairly well-worn copy. You'll find that many of these have had quite hard professional lives. This lens dates from somewhere between 1999 and 2004 and features the silent wave motor, which is kind of like the ultrasonic motor that Canon was using, and of course is much faster than the screw drive autofocus lenses, like for example this whatever it is, 28 to 85. Let's get into some of its features. The first feature, I suppose you could say, is the tripod mount, which is built in and obviously adjustable around there, and brings me to the fact that the tripod mount is really very necessary for this beast, because on this Nikon f4 the whole assembly weighs 3 kilos, and that is a nice big weight to be holding up. And if you add the lens hood, the HB17, it becomes somewhat unwieldy. We have on here a feature which I think is fantastic, which are AF hold buttons. So if you have the camera on autofocus, there's a button, well, there's multiple buttons, actually there's 3 of them, around the lens that fall under the thumb or the fingers, and you can focus using the center bracket, or if you're using a model that had more brackets than the f4, and then lock the focus with the button until you release it. A fantastic feature, and something that I was using on various test pictures, which I'll show you in a while. It has a focus limiter, which will give you full or infinity to 2.5 meters. I hadn't particularly experimented with that or found it useful, but and of course you have auto and manual focus switch. I would certainly recommend using this lens on a camera that's got the ability, like the f4, to use a vertical shutter release, because you don't want to be doing that with it, and doing that is an awful lot easier. The weight you get used to, and the tripod mount is actually very, very useful for tucking into a belt to relieve some of the weight of a strap. But of course the biggest feature of this zoom lens is that it doesn't behave like a zoom lens. I treat this lens, and I always have, but the previous 80-200 that I had, as a prime, because you can shoot it wide open all day, anywhere up the focal length range from 80-200, wide open, plenty of blurry backgrounds with no loss of sharpness wide open. People will say, oh, it's softer wide open. You really can't detect any softness in there. It's quite a remarkable lens, and we used to call it the money maker, because it was capable of extracting a money shot out of pretty much any situation. Quite a remarkable piece of kit if you can put up with the weight. I'm grabbing a coffee in order to discuss the other problem that you're going to get with this lens, aside from the weight, if you carry it about and shoot photographs with it as it deserves to be. And that is wanted or unwanted attention. You cannot walk anywhere with this lens without people spotting it, passing comment on it, possibly eyeing it with suspicion, and it is a red rag to a bull with security guards, as I found out over last weekend when I went to the business park around the Excel Centre to shoot some images of the landscape, and ended up by having a security guard coming out and questioning me. There were plenty of people around who were using small cameras and particularly camera phones, but of course the 80-200 2.8 stuck out like a sore thumb. There are two sides to every question, and also I have people coming up to me when I'm carrying this around out and being interested. But if you wish to remain an observer without, as they call it, bruising the scene, this is not the lens to be using, however sharp and wonderful it might be. The very next day, after I'd been told by the lovely security guard outside Excel that I was being filmed on CCTV, that I could carry on taking photographs, but that I should be aware that I was being filmed, which seemed a bit strange. But, you know, I went to Coalhouse Fort, which is another one of my favourite photo locations, and I took this beast and had a wonderful walk around and met, and I will give a shout out to the owner of Poppy and Teddy, two lovely dogs who ran around my legs, and whose owner clocked the gear that I was using and suggested that I take some photographs of them, which I did. And again, this shows the other reaction that you get to this lens, one of friendliness and interest. So you may need to think, before you buy one of these, what do I want it for? If you want it for what it was intended for, which is photographing people, photographing life as it happens, then it is going to draw attention to you, and it may not be attention that you want. If you're going to use it for, as I did, equestrian photography, theatre photography, all kinds of event photography, maybe weddings, great. You will certainly not have any problem with people recognizing that you're the photographer. Just remember that goes for the whole time. And also remember that this is quite a remarkable lens and is able to produce fantastic results. So let's get into some of them. So if you're going to think about buying one of these, and you can cope with weight and the unwanted attention, then don't worry too much about the fact that some of these look a little bit worn. They are built to take professional use, and a few dust specks inside will not damage the image quality. Nikon zooms are fairly well known for hoovering up dust, and again, that's really not too much of a problem. Avoid ones obviously that have got scratches or marks on the lens elements, and some of them can have AF problems. They can jam up. Again, if you can, get one, as I did with this one, from a retailer where you can get a warranty on it. Yeah, so there you have the 80-200 f2.8, the best zoom lens you may not be allowed to use under certain circumstances. So if you've enjoyed this, then perhaps you'll consider hitting the like button. And if you want to see all of the great content that I've got coming up shortly in my beginning photography series, in my beginning processing series, then perhaps you'll think about subscribing, because it'll do the channel a hell of a lot good and it'll give me a big smile on my face. Anyway, until I see you all again, take care of yourselves and keep taking photos.